Okay, we should be live on YouTube in a minute or two. And...
Oui, en fait, j'ai une réunion qui commence au téléphone dans 2 minutes.
Madame Bolibari, bonjour.
Oui, bonjour.
Ça va bien, ça va bien. Et vous?
Oui, contente de vous revoir, vraiment.
Même si c'est un peu loin là.
Oui, c'est vrai. Je suis juste en train d'arriver là. Donc, dans 2 minutes, je pense, ce serait bon.
Eh ben, c'est parfait. On commence dans 2 minutes.
J'ai quitté le bureau, donc je suis juste en train d'arriver là. Dès que je rentre, c'est bon. D'accord? Donc, à tout à l'heure. Dans 2 minutes, vraiment. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. J'achète des fruits pour les enfants. J'achète des fruits pour les enfants. Merci beaucoup. Ok, bonne week-end.
It's quite funny. I had the YouTube video on. I was like, it's funny. Madame Bolibari is speaking again, saying the same thing as 2 minutes ago, because he has a 2-minute difference. Okay, I think we're pretty set. Let's give it 1 more minute and we'll start. Hi, Hugh. Welcome and welcome to all the participants. We'll be starting in a minute. Okay, let's start. I think we're getting on time and we have a very busy program today, and we promised everyone to keep it short and sweet and exciting, and so we will. So hello everyone, welcome to this second anniversary of the Abidjan Principles on the Right to Education. My name is Sylvain Aubry. I work as a senior research and legal advisor with the Global Initiative for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The Global Initiative for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights is one of the 5 organizations that were part of the Secretariat that facilitated the process and the development of the Abidjan Principles, alongside with Amnesty International, the Equal Education Law Center, the Initiative for Social Economic Rights, and the Right to Education Initiative. We are extremely delighted to welcome you today to this event. It's been a very exciting journey since the beginning of the drafting of the Abidjan Principles, then the adoption 2 years ago. And a lot has happened the last 2 years. And we're here today to celebrate and reflect on this achievement of the last 2 years, as well as to look forward to what the right to education, the role the right to education can play in the coming year in these very difficult and challenging times. We have an amazing range of intervenants today. And as you'll see, rather than having a panel, we'll rather have a sort of popcorn celebration with lots of people sharing different views. And we're also very delighted to have as a moderator for the session today, so you won't have to hear me all the time, but you'll hear Joshua Castellino, who is currently the Executive Director of Minority Rights Group, and among the list of things he's done in rich career was formerly the Dean of the School of Law at Middlesex University. In terms of housekeeping, interpretation is available in French and Spanish. La traduction est disponible en français. La traducción está disponible en español, using the button at the bottom right. This session is recorded and is also available live on YouTube. We actually had many sign-up today, many more than we were hoping. So some of you might have, we may have some people, I think, who have to follow on YouTube. But we're happy that there's actually much more attendance rather than the opposite. And I think it shows the momentum behind this initiative. We won't have a Q&A today, as Joshua will explain. We will have rather an open discussion, so feel free to chat, put your comments in the chat as we go. So we'll start in a couple of minutes with Joshua and the intervenants, the speakers we have today. But just before that, we're also launching today the 5th of a series of 5 videos to celebrate the anniversary of the Abidjan Principles. And this 5th video is a video that was also produced by an amazing group, the Rainbow Collective, which is a group based in London that has been producing all the videos. And this one is an animated video that I will share with you now on the screen, and we hope it works on the technical side, and will serve as an opener to today's session. So if you just give me 1 second, I will share my screen with the video to open today's session. In the meantime, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself in the chat if you want, and you can also put in your name on the participant list. You can put in your name and your organization, which will help identify each other. Okay, the video is ready, and we'll play it in a second.
Free education of the highest possible quality, and states have the obligation to provide for this right without discrimination. However, children's access to quality education is highly unequal and too often contingent on their background. Decades of underfunding of public schools and commercialization of education has left too many classrooms overcrowded and under-resourced. Commercialization of education has led many governments and investors to shift funds to private education, siphoning away vital funds from public schools. As a result, private schools have developed rapidly, often without the necessary regulation, serving those that can afford it, thus contributing to heightening inequalities and segregation. To address this situation, the Abidjan Principles on the Right to Education were adopted in February 2019. They summarize in one place all existing laws and standards that protect our right to education. The Abidjan Principles were developed through a participatory process involving people from various backgrounds and regions, and drafted by a group of 57 of the most qualified experts from around the world. Governments applying the Abidjan Principles will ensure that they deliver on the right to free and quality public education for all, regardless of social and economic background, gender, or ability, and that they regulate all schools adequately. The Abidjan Principles are emerging as a landmark tool for states striving to comply with their human rights obligations, and for individuals and communities to claim their right to education. Find out more by visiting the Abidjan Principles website and join us on GI-ESCR.org to take action now to make the right to education a reality.
Xin Nian Kuai Le. Happy New Year. Happy Chinese New Year. Let's hope that the year of the ox gives us the prosperity and the good health that we desperately deserve, and I think gives us something of a way ahead in terms of how we can create a less fragmented world. And that's what we are here to do, colleagues. We're here to celebrate one of the great initiatives, really in putting together a set of principles that can guide and create a less fragmented society than we have. I mean, the pandemic has brought this really to light. We've lived now in segmented worlds, and we live in worlds where the accident of birth, more than anything else, seem to determine the trajectory of any child. Education is obviously fundamental to this, and it's a real pleasure to be here today with what I can only describe as a star-studded panel to really share their thoughts and reflections with you on the Abidjan Principles 2nd anniversary. But this is hopefully not like another standard Zoom call. Really, I mean that. In the sense that we want to engage with you. We want to hear from you. We want to celebrate with you, and we want to really encourage you to put some thoughts down with us on what is an interactive exercise immediately after we hear from our speakers themselves. And that way you can leave a message of what the Abidjan Principles mean to you. Sylvain said that there won't be time for question and answers, but I do hope you will really engage in the comments panel so that we can put some of these conversations and bring them to light. And I'd encourage our speakers to read those comments as well, to the extent that that's possible, to really try and address some of those issues. So the Abidjan Principles that were passed 2 years ago have really taken a life of their own, as various different bodies have come to realize that they are really pretty fundamental to what we think of as building back better. They already got traction before the pandemic, of course, but since the pandemic has started, there has been this real awareness of how fragmented our societies are and why it's really crucial to ensure that society is best equipped to deal with the kinds of challenges that are ahead. And those challenges vary from pandemics to the environmental crises, but really unless we grow in solidarity together and have a shared mission, the idea that we can bring back this community, this world community, from the brink of the disaster that we are on is really just a myth. So I encourage you to look at the principles. Those of you who haven't had a chance to engage with them, the website is outstanding. It really gives you a lot of detail about the range of principles, thought processes that have guided it, and also the range of institutions that have stood up to celebrate this. So without further ado, I'd like to move to our speakers. I mean, they come from an absolute range of professions. They come from a range of perspectives on society, and they bring a really strong track record of achievement. There won't be time to introduce each of them, but I really strongly encourage, just Google them or echinacea them as the better, perhaps more ethical version of Google, and try and find out more about them and engage with their work, because you'll hear them today, but what they can say to you today is a really fraction of what it is that they actually achieve and what they do for education rights. So with that, I'd like to start and maybe start this process by asking the first speaker to come onto our panel discussion, and that's Professor Anne Skelton, who, among a variety of other things, and you'll see her as the slide there, is also chair of the process that really got us the Abidjan Principles. Anne, would you mind sharing your reflections with us, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Joshua. I've been looking in the chat and seeing people wishing the Abidjan Principles a happy birthday. So I join in that. But I wonder how happy the birthday is, because it's been a rather tumultuous second year that the Abidjan Principles has had to face in its infancy, in the sense that I think COVID has had a huge impact on the right to education generally. And I must say, I've been thinking a lot about what this might mean for the possible rise of privatization, because as we're seeing a tech rise in relation to education, I have the feeling that a privatization rise is not far behind that. Now, of course, the Abidjan Principles did not look at procurement, curriculum development, etc. It looked mostly at the delivery of education in education institutions. But I think that's another space that we need to start thinking about, because it's the space where we might see the biggest development of privatization in the coming years. But I think even in the delivery of education, we may see a rise of homeschooling and a rise of private education endeavors. Although those of you who've actually been doing homeschooling, I'm sure would think that anyone is crazy to actually embark on homeschooling. But I'm thinking of more organized types of homeschooling in which others are brought in to tutor and so on. In South Africa, there were some interesting debates about this, because when the schools also, the private schools, decided to go back earlier than the government schools, saying that, you know, they were not bound by government's decisions on reopening dates of schools, which led to a little bit of debate, and the union started to you know, mobilize a little around the issue. It got smoothed over fairly quickly, but I think it's one of those things that COVID showed us is a new frontier, something like private schools being able to continue uninterrupted during COVID, where government schools might have been unable to do so. And one other thing that I wanted to tell you about in South Africa, which was a very positive development, was a constitutional court judgment in which the amicus curiae argued the Abidjan Principles, and indeed a lot of international law principles got into the judgment, the final judgment. And essentially this was about 2 children who were excluded from a school because of their father's behavior, essentially, not his failure to pay the bills, but actually the way he behaved on the edges of the sports field, etc. And what was interesting was that the High Court and the Supreme Court had decided that private schools, the agreements between private schools and parents are simply contracts, and the Constitution doesn't come into it. The Constitutional Court had a very different view and determined that private schools cannot become enclaves of power that are outside of the operation of the Constitution, and very firmly found that before excluding children, there would be obligations to consider their best interests, to consider their views, to consider a range of other alternatives. And so I think that this takes us into a new era where it's quite clear now in South African law that the Constitution and not the contract is what is important. So looking forward to hearing the reflections of others, and I'm handing back to you, Joshua.
That's brilliant, Dan. Thank you very much for kicking us off with that. And I think the warning as well about the extent to which we need to rethink some of the elements here and start progressing the agenda even further. Much appreciated. Next, I'd like to call upon UN Special Rapporteur, Dr. Kumba Bolibari. It's a real pleasure, Madam, to welcome you here, and the work that you've done on furthering the reach of these principles is particularly admirable. Thank you very much. It's over to you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Moi, je vais m'exprimer en français. Donc, je voudrais vous remercier, monsieur le modérateur, et remercier, bien sûr, Anne, qui vient déjà de poser les vrais éléments concernant cet instrument magnifique qui a été construit depuis 2 bonnes années. Je voudrais juste insister, en tant que rapporteur spécial des Nations Unies sur le droit à l'éducation, sur 2 éléments fondamentaux. Je pense que depuis l'histoire, bien sûr, des droits à l'éducation en termes de documents de référence, de documents normatifs qui ont été élaborés depuis Catalina, qui a vraiment mis en exergue ce document-là sur les 4A en termes de comment rendre opérationnel, c'est-à-dire c'est toute la réflexion conceptuelle, mais aussi comment rendre opérationnel le droit à l'éducation. Je crois qu'on peut parler du second document important en termes de normatif, mais surtout en termes de référence, qui est vraiment, et ce document-là, ce sont les principes d'Abidjan. Parce que c'est un document de réflexion, mais aussi c'est un document qui a été bâti pratiquement sur les traités et tous les organes, bien sûr, des Nations Unies. Et ça, je pense que, et aussi sur les pratiques du terrain, à la fois en termes de conceptualisation théorique, mais aussi en termes de quelle est la meilleure façon de pouvoir les utiliser. En tout cas, nous, au niveau du mandat, nous avons utilisé ce document-là et il est devenu pratiquement un document de référence que nous utilisons dans nos discours au quotidien. Il a été présenté, bien sûr, à l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, il a été présenté au Conseil des droits de l'homme, bien sûr, à Genève, mais au-delà, il a fait l'objet de plusieurs rapportages, mais aussi d'utilisation au cours de nos discours, à la fois pour s'adresser en termes communicationnels à certains États. Le dernier, c'était au Brésil. Mais au-delà, c'est aussi des opportunités pour nous de pouvoir continuer à faire ce travail de dialogue politique avec certaines organisations. Je peux citer, par exemple, l'exemple du partenariat mondial sur l'éducation qui avait bâti sa stratégie et que nous avons utilisé pour justement argumenter la privatisation du Global Partnership for Education. Nous avons vraiment utilisé les principes d'Abidjan et le contenu, bien sûr, des principes d'Abidjan comme outil de référence. Et je pense que quelque part, ça a fondamentalement aidé aussi à argumenter, mais à aider les acteurs à aller dans les droits humains, dans la nouvelle perspective. Donc, pour nous, ça reste un document de référence pratiquement normatif, à la fois pour les décideurs, mais aussi pour les praticiens, mais aussi pour des espaces de réflexion. Donc, sincèrement, c'est encore dire félicitations à toute l'équipe qui était autour, mais surtout leur dire que nous allons poursuivre cette réflexion ensemble. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Dr. Bolibari, and for the spirit you've breathed into these principles and the reach you've taken it to. Next, it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Soledad Garcia Munoz, a friend of mine and now a special rapporteur on economic, social, and environmental rights at the Inter-American Commission. And Soledad, you've done much to pursue this agenda and really spread its wings into practice in Latin America. We'd love to hear your reflections.
Thank you, Joshua. Very nice to see you. Good morning, everyone. I will speak in Spanish, the most widely spoken language in the American continent, as you know. Hola a todos y a todas. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de adherir y de celebrar hoy estos principios, cuya relevancia y urgencia de aplicación se hacen cada vez más evidentes. Como relator especial para los derechos económicos, sociales, culturales y ambientales de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, mi mandato incluye el derecho a la educación, como también el tema empresas y derechos humanos. Es un mandato holístico que incluye todos los DESCA, derechos económicos, sociales, culturales y ambientales, y temas como la pobreza o empresas y derechos humanos, trabajando fuertemente desde la dimensión de indivisibilidad e interdependencia de todos los derechos humanos, como desde una perspectiva de interseccionalidad. En ese sentido, los principios de Abidjan han sido, desde que empezamos a participar en la elaboración de los mismos, una herramienta muy útil para el mandato. Y desde esa experiencia me sumo hoy muy especialmente a las felicitaciones por el aniversario de esta fundamental, yo diría, carta de navegación para los estados, los organismos internacionales y los actores educativos del mundo. En 2019, cuando se adoptaron los principios, las preocupaciones de nuestra vida eran otras. Nos enfrentábamos a otras tensiones y no a los desafíos de esta pandemia mundial y de emergencia sanitaria, económica y social que estamos viviendo. Sin embargo, esta pandemia vino a demostrar y a constatar lo que estos principios ya habían establecido hace 2 años. La importancia de la educación para la sociedad, su carácter multidimensional y su alcance fundamental para la realización de otros derechos humanos. Justamente este último aspecto ha sido crucial ante el cierre de las escuelas en América y en todo el mundo, pues hemos visto cómo la ausencia de niños, niñas y jóvenes en el espacio educativo alrededor de todo el mundo ha implicado no solo la falta de aprendizajes y socialización, sino también la falta de acceso a bienes básicos como la alimentación o el agua, especialmente para grupos en situación de mayor vulnerabilidad, como son las personas que viven en la pobreza o los pueblos indígenas en las Américas. Así, ante la pandemia del COVID-19, se ha verificado, tal como lo señala el preámbulo de los principios de Abidjan, que la educación desempeña un papel esencial tanto para el desarrollo de la personalidad de los niños y las niñas como para el desafío de construir una sociedad más justa y equitativa. La educación se presenta como un derecho multiplicador, potenciador y transformador de la sociedad, y en estos tiempos difíciles se ha demostrado lo fundamental que es la capacidad de flexibilidad y adaptabilidad que deben tener todos los actores de la educación para que se logre garantizar este derecho en todos sus aspectos. También esos principios nos recuerdan que los estados tienen la obligación de respetar, proteger, garantizar y hacer efectivo el derecho a la educación tanto en el ámbito público como en el privado. Precisamente esos principios nos recuerdan la participación de agentes privados en la educación y la obligación imperiosa de los estados de regular estrictamente a esos actores. Para la Relatoría Especial a mi cargo, este aspecto resulta fundamental y ha quedado reflejado ya en nuestro informe Empresas y Derechos Humanos Estándares Interamericanos, donde citamos los principios y en el que nos sumamos al llamado para que los estados adopten medidas efectivas reguladoras y de supervisión cuando entidades privadas se encuentren directamente involucradas en la realización de un derecho como es el derecho a la educación. De esta manera, estos principios aparecen para mi mandato como una valiosa fuente especializada para la interpretación de esta temática en el marco del sistema interamericano. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Soledad. Thank you for the incredible work that you're doing in really increasing the reach. Colleagues, you've heard from special rapporteurs and the drafter, but actually governments have been responding to this agenda too. And I'd love to call next upon Donatien Hissard, who's Deputy Director of Sustainable Development at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, France. Please, Donatien.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Castellino. Je commence par excuser Madame Issard, en fait, qui a été retenue pour une autre réunion importante, et donc je vais tenter de la représenter aujourd'hui, mais je travaille dans son équipe comme chef d'une unité qui couvre les enjeux d'éducation et d'égalité de genre au ministère des Affaires étrangères. Voilà, donc je voulais remercier tout d'abord tous les participants, tous les intervenants et intervenantes de cette réunion. C'est vrai que du point de vue français aussi, c'est extrêmement réjouissant de constater la mobilisation d'une telle diversité d'experts et d'expertes, surtout, je voudrais dire, et représentants d'institutions et d'organisations internationales autour d'une question aussi importante que le droit à l'éducation. Ça fait plusieurs années, peut-être 4 ou 5, que la France suit et soutient la progression de l'initiative portés par les acteurs de la société civile et les spécialistes du droit à l'éducation qui ont abouti à la rédaction et la publication des principes d'Abidjan. Et nous nous réjouissons aujourd'hui de la légitimité, de la visibilité que ce travail a gagné. Je me joins aux propos tenus par Madame Bolibari sur l'importance de ce document qui fait aujourd'hui office de cadre de référence dans le cadre de nombreux débats et dialogue politique, et c'est vrai que le partenariat mondial pour l'éducation, au sein duquel la France joue aussi un rôle important, est un très bon exemple à cet égard, et on s'est effectivement appuyé sur les principes d'Abidjan pour avancer une vision positive du rôle des acteurs privés dans ce secteur. Je reviendrai comme les intervenantes précédentes sur la crise de la Covid-19 qui a eu effectivement des conséquences dans toutes les sphères économiques et sociales, et a exacerbé un certain nombre de tendances structurelles et qui nous rappelle en fait la nécessité de disposer de cadres, de repères, de dispositifs de régulation pour favoriser la résilience des systèmes et des services dans les secteurs essentiels. On parle aujourd'hui d'éducation, mais on pourrait aussi parler du secteur de la santé, par exemple. Et effectivement, nous joignons aux voix qui rappellent que les États sont les garants de cette régulation, qu'il leur revient de mettre en place les cadres dont l'ensemble des acteurs ont besoin, et à commencer par les usagers et les populations. Ici, les élèves, leurs familles, ainsi que les enseignants et la communauté éducative. Le choc de la crise sanitaire nous apprend aussi que nous devons réfléchir et, comme vous le disiez, Joshua, réfléchir vite, accélérer notre réflexion sur l'avenir de l'éducation en renouvelant d'une certaine manière notre logiciel et nos cadres de référence si nous voulons répondre à des difficultés structurelles présentes dans de nombreux pays et que la crise sanitaire n'a fait qu'accentuer. Des difficultés liées par exemple à la croissance des effectifs scolaires ou à la faible formation et à la faible valorisation des enseignants dans certains pays. Donc les chantiers à poursuivre pour transformer l'éducation sont nombreux, pour faire évoluer les contenus, les méthodes d'apprentissage à la lumière des défis du XXIe siècle, qu'ils soient écologiques ou environnementaux, pour tirer le meilleur parti possible des technologies, permettre la continuité éducative en cas de crise, nous le voyons à l'heure actuelle, mais aussi pour renouveler les relations entre apprenants et enseignants à l'ère du numérique, ou encore pour développer les passerelles entre éducation informelle et formelle, en impliquant d'autres acteurs en complément de l'école. Je pense aux associations, aux médias sociaux, pour compléter quelque part l'éducation scolaire. Et dans ce sens, il est important de former aussi les enseignants à l'intégration de ces acteurs dans leurs approches pédagogiques. Voilà, ce que je voulais apporter à cette discussion, ce sont ces sujets sur lesquels des partenariats avec d'autres acteurs sont possibles, y compris des acteurs privés, y compris des entreprises, et notamment des entreprises à vocation sociale, des partenariats qui peuvent être montés pour... En s'appuyant sur les expertises de chacun pour apporter une dimension positive à cette idée de partenariat public-privé. Et voilà, c'était un peu cette dimension plus positive que je voulais apporter au débat aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Hélène, and please do pass on our thanks as well to Madame Issad and for the support that France has shown for these principles. Next, we go to the judiciary, and let's find out from Honorable Lady Justice Lydia Mugambe at the High Court of in Uganda as to her perspectives. Lady Justice, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to the organizers. I think as we celebrate 2 years of the Abidjan Principles, my highlight is that the principles have equipped the courts and different stakeholders with to authoritatively direct government policy, to authoritatively speak to ministers of education and other actors in the ministry on how one, their role as the responsible executive department, and also to, in the past, we didn't have, you'd speak of the ministry has to control private actors, but you didn't have that medium with which and authority with which to refer them to. But now with the Abidjan Principles, we have a medium within which to say, this is how you should be doing. This is an example and you should draw from this. So in that sense, I think the Abidjan Principles have given us authority as the courts and other stakeholders in education. We have NGOs now having constructive conversations with the Ministry of Education on what kind of national policies should be adopted as we are in the process of drafting national policies. And the judiciary has been able to direct the Ministry of Education to refer to the Abidjan Principles as the Magna Charta sort of from which to draw from in the policies they come up with. But I think I've also observed that governments now have an opportunity, the government has an opportunity not to work in abstract, they have something to look at in the development of their different policies. So I think it has been very constructive. Although I think in countries like Uganda, there is need to educate the different actors more about the Abidjan Principles. The ministry needs to study more the Abidjan Principles and incorporate them into our national policies. But I think it is looking good I must say, and I am one of those who were the first to use the Abidjan Principles in directing the Ministry of Education to refer to them in managing and controlling the excesses or negative aspects of private actors in education in Uganda. And I think the ministry has drawn on from there. Many other people didn't know about the Abidjan Principles, but it was an opportunity to bring it home to all our actors nationally. And I think we are taking shape thanks to the Abidjan Principles.
Thank you very much.
I think if I still have time, I could add that the Abidjan Principles also have created a medium of the Ministry of Education or the executive or government understanding their important regulatory role, and that it never goes away, whether with private actors or their government schools. They've re-emphasized, and the actors have learned that they remain with their role. And I think the Abidjan Principles have really been part of that reinforcing force in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Mugambe, for your pioneering efforts and leadership from the bench and for joining us from Kampala traffic. Much appreciated. Next, we call upon Aoife Nolan, who's really a leading scholar, Professor Aoife Nolan, at a key drafter and of the principles. So please, Aoife, over to you.
Absolutely. Listen, how wonderful it is to be here marking 2 years since the Abidjan Principles. I mean, it's wonderful. And, you know, it's been so exciting to see the discussion they've generated and the different impacts at the international level, the domestic level. And I think most importantly, what has been wonderful to see has been the role that the principles have played in encouraging and advancing advocacy and research and state thinking about these really thorny issues of human rights, public goods and services, and privatization. And as other speakers have said, you know, the COVID context has really made clear the urgency of this work. And during the pandemic, we've seen private actors playing very influential roles with regards to human rights enjoyment, okay? And we've seen this not just in the area of education, but also in healthcare and social care, housing and employment. So while the Abidjan Principles are primarily focused on the education context, they obviously have lessons and provide insight for people working on human rights and privatization and the involvement of the private sector in a wide range of other areas, okay? And I think it is true to say that the Abidjan Principles have played a key role in laying the groundwork for informed debates about the role of private actors in human rights delivery. And I think one of the things, and it's what I want to use the very small remainder of my time to talk about, is it's striking the extent to which the principles have, even in the very short time they've been in place, impacted on the practice and the approach of different human rights entities since their adoption. And so, for instance, just to give one example, and I thought it was wonderful to hear from the previous speaker about the impact on the judiciary and the government in the Ugandan context. I'm a member of a regional human rights body, the European Committee of Social Rights. And we, of course, in our work, like all human rights bodies, are frequently faced with national situations involving the role of the private sector, whether it is in supporting or in undermining human rights. And last year, when looking at the record of states parties to the European Social Charter, in terms of Article 17.2 of the Charter on the right to education, we went so far as to adopt a statement of interpretation on this issue. Now, a statement of interpretation is a document that can be compared in terms of its legal status and its aim to a UN treaty body general comments. And in that statement, we recall that Article 17.2 of the Charter requires states to establish and maintain an educational system that is both accessible and effective. And we recognize that the Charter provides that the obligations under 17.2 may be met directly or through the involvement of private actors. But we then went on to say that we went on and we mentioned the principles, and we went on to say talk about the requirement that states respect, that the requirement that states have to respect the freedom of parents to choose an educational institution other than a public institution leaves unchanged the obligation under the Charter to provide free, quality public education. And we make clear that the offer of educational alternatives by private actors must not be detrimental to the allocation of resources towards public education or otherwise undermine the accessibility and quality of public education. Okay, so, and of course, that is just one example of the way in which the principles are contributing to international human rights bodies' efforts to engage with what are challenging issues around privatization and human rights. You know, and we are basically at the beginning of a much bigger body of work around this issue. And that work has been very much rendered urgent by the COVID context. So it is great to be here, to be having this conversation, because we're 2 years in. But if there's anything the last year has shown us, it is that we cannot be complacent about the role of private actors in the context of human rights delivery and indeed accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Aoife, and for your role as an architect here and also in furthering its processes. From a professor of international human rights law to a professor of education and development, let's hear from Elaine Unterhalter, please.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be part of this conversation and to be hearing from people all over the world and to be celebrating the Abidjan Principles, which for me as a social researcher is represents something that's a real kind of beacon of hope for foregrounding social and economic rights as really central to how we think about education systems, which are often thought about in very technical and dry ways and not as ways of fulfilling rights and thinking about the quality of how we connect with each other, connect with children, connect with the kinds of futures that are encapsulated in the idea of education. And I think this terrible tragedy of this year, all the suffering that's been associated with it, as well as the gross inequalities that have been exposed by it and the high levels of poverty, even in the most affluent societies, people have scrambled for every kind of pragmatic solution, and often public-private partnerships have been seized on because it seems to be the closest. And we don't have ways of evaluating them unless we look at something like the Abidjan Principles, unless we draw on a framework of thinking about human rights. And in the UK, there was this really gross example of the provision of free school meals, which had been contracted through a highly dubious process out to a private company. And the food given was very, very inadequate, absolutely undermining the ideas about provision of quality education under conditions of health crisis. So in the Abidjan Principles, I think we find that kind of beacon of nexus of ideas that can help us evaluate PPPs. And I co-edited this book on critical reflections on public-private partnerships that was published in December. And we have studies of public-private partnerships in health, in education, in housing, in water. And for the last chapter of the book, we said, this is such a depressing story. Wherever public-private partnerships have been introduced, they've introduced more inequality. What is there to be done? How can we think about them? And the last chapter of the book is about the Abidjan Principles, because it feels, I think this echoes the point Aoife was making, that it feels that in education, in the Abidjan Principles, we have distilled a feature of what can be done. And in this kind of confusing time of COVID, it allows us to stabilize something and to guide towards something. It kind of gives a lighthouse to navigate towards. the chapter in the book drew on this report that I'd done, commissioned by ActionAid, in which we had studied how we could use the Abidjan Principles to evaluate the education systems in 4 countries, and other work was done in 3 other countries in Africa. And it's very thought-provoking how you use a legal system to evaluate and think about the widely diffuse and highly complex sets of relations about education. And I think there's huge potential, both in relation to social research, as well as to giving us something to guide us through the present time, which is terrible, and the future, which will be hard. So, you know, salutations to everyone who's worked on it, and let's keep going together. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, and for your compelling writing on the principles since as well. Next, we call upon members of civil society. And of course, first we have Ram Gair, who's going to speak to us from Nepal. And Ram, your work at grassroots levels has been stunning in changing the education sphere. Please do give us your thoughts on the principles.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for organizers to invite us to be a part of this important anniversary. And NC Nepal is a national coalitions, and since Abidjan Principles discussion was started, and we were engaged through the community level consultations to get input from the peoples, especially the marginalized community, and to ensure their agenda in the document. And since the AP was adopted in 2019, and then we are being a part of it to disseminate in the national level to inform the stakeholders, especially the political parties, governments, and parliamentarian, so that they will be informed in the provisions of that in the Abidjan Principle, and they will be more accountable towards the right to education. And also, we also build the capacity of the civil society on the provisions of the Abidjan Principle, so that they will be more informed and they will be able to influence with the local governments level to implement the Abidjan's principles. And yeah, so you can see that we have localized and contextualized the Abidjan Principle in the country level, and we have been heavily engaged with the local governments because they are formulating the local policies to ensure right to education. And our constitutions, it says that it's a local government's accountability to ensure the free and compulsory educations up to secondary level, and local governments are the ones to form the policies, and we have been able to be a part and to engage with the local government using the provisions of the Abidjan Principle. In context of the COVID, as previous speakers explained, that yes, because of the COVID, yeah, there has been the influence of the private actors in educations. Yeah, in Nepal there is the growing privatizations, and it's rather more in the COVID context, and this principle can be the good reference point to regulate the private actors and make them forced to respect the principle and provisions of the human rights, so that the human rights issues of the every child is respected, is fulfilled and protected. And also, yes, the governments has a commitment to ensure the free and compulsory education from the constitutions, and it's a government accountability, and there should be the sufficient financing for the educations, but the government has not been able to allocate the sufficient funding for educations, and means this also is a good reference document to use as a reference document to hold the government accountable. And in context of the COVID, there is the risk of going down the education budget, though there should be the additional funding to ensure the education in the crisis and the pandemic. And in this context also, that we can use this to hold the government accountable. And most importantly, in the COVID context, the rights of the marginalized and deprived community is in a challenge, and there is the issue of the equity and the children with the disability and marginalized and poor communities, migrant people's children's right to education is a challenge. So means that we can take this Abidjan Principle as a reference document to use the advocacy tools for the civil society and make the governments and other stakeholders accountable to respect the rights of those marginalized community and maintain the equity and inclusion in the education. And lastly, there's, as mentioned in a previous speaker also, there should be the interagency collaborations. Education is also connected with the other sectors like health and sanitations. And this also is a good point at good times to have advocacy and to use this document, and so that there should be a good collaborations with the different sectors, and the right to education also is protected and respected. And yes, and its last point is in the COVID context also, there has been the loss of the policy development, and in the local level, in the federal level, and the local level, and national level also. And in this point that we can use this document, and we can take the different provisions that strengthening the public education system, holding the governments accountable, and regulating the private sectors, those provisions, and we can and engage with the local governments to make them more accountable. And the ultimate is to respect the right to education of children. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ram, for that and the work you do. And so we go from Nepal straight to Canada, where we have Stéphane Vignold, who might tell us a little bit about your work, Stéphane, and parents associations, please.
Sure, thanks you, Joshua. Merci de l'invitation. Bonjour tout le monde. Je vais tout de suite diriger votre attention vers le dessin qu'on nous a demandé de fournir un dessin. J'ai choisi celui-là de Jacques Goldstein, qui décrit parfaitement le modèle, si je peux dire, d'éducation au Québec. Vous voyez d'un côté une école privée, des écoles publiques spécialisées en sport, en art, en international. Et de l'autre côté, vous avez l'école publique ordinaire. Qu'est-ce qui différencie les deux côtés? Vous l'avez déjà deviné, j'imagine. Du côté des écoles privées ou des écoles publiques spécialisées, bien, on a le droit de choisir nos élèves, en fait, choisir nos clients, et on les choisit avec des examens, des entrevues, surtout avec des frais de scolarité, en fait. Et de l'autre côté, vous avez l'école publique ordinaire qui, elle, ne choisit pas ses élèves et qui enseigne à tout le monde, tous les enfants de son quartier. Donc, vous reconnaissez là le schéma classique de la ségrégation scolaire, en fait, où, bien sûr, dans l'école publique ordinaire, on retrouve une surreprésentation d'élèves en difficulté ou d'élèves défavorisés. Donc, c'est le modèle que nous, au mouvement, bien sûr, on veut réformer. On fait toutes sortes de choses pour y arriver. Une d'entre elles, c'est le rapport qu'on a soumis il y a 1 an, en fait, c'est en février 2020, au Comité des droits économiques, culturels et sociaux de l'ONU, qui, en leur demandant à eux d'exiger du Québec qu'ils justifient sa politique, qu'ils ont une politique officieuse de ségrégation scolaire. Et on a basé notre rapport sur les principes d'Abidjan. Et on a réussi à démontrer que, en fait, le gouvernement du Québec violait 9 des principes dans son système d'éducation, notamment le 65A, qui est peut-être le plus évident, c'est-à-dire celui qui dit que tout financement public d'une école privée doit être assorti d'une échéance. Et bien sûr, dans notre cas, il n'y a aucune échéance. Ça fait 52 ans que le robinet des fonds publics est grand ouvert vers les écoles dites privées. Donc, très rapidement, en mars 2020, le comité a accepté notre demande et il a formellement demandé au gouvernement donc de lui fournir de l'information sur les mesures prises pour garantir un accès égal à tous les élèves et je cite, indépendamment de la situation économique de leurs parents. Donc, pour nous, ça a été une avancée majeure de voir le Québec forcé de rendre des comptes, et c'est grâce aux principes. Et le gouvernement du Québec a encore 5 mois pour rendre publique sa réponse. Donc, d'ici juin, on devrait savoir ce qu'ils vont dire. Donc, on a très hâte de connaître leur réponse et on pourra la diffuser, la partager avec vous. Donc, pour nous, en fait, les principes d'Abidjan ont été très utiles et ils le seront encore dans les mois à venir. Donc, bonne fête, les principes, et surtout, merci à tout le monde qui a travaillé si fort pour permettre leur adoption. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Stéphane. We wait for that outcome too and look forward to hearing more about it. Our last intervention, and so this is also advance warning that the floor will soon be open and we can hear from you. Our last intervention is from Amélie Gagnon, UNESCO, a key player really in the education field. And we have a video message, I believe, Sylvain.
All right, and I hope it's going to work.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amélie Gagnon, and I'm leading the development unit at UNESCO's International Institute for Educational Planning, IIEP. It's a pleasure to be here today. Planning for education requires a constant effort to make quality learning opportunities accessible, equitable, and efficient. Building a sustainable future means that the right to education is fulfilled, especially in emergency context. Despite the solid normative framework established by international human rights instruments and the efforts made at country level, education remains a privilege for many, and policy is still far away from practice. But talking about it is not enough. The right to education needs to be enforced. The Abidjan Principles can be used as a technical tool to identify key markers and targets that translate states' efforts into making the right to education a reality. And this is how, at IIP, we are using the Abidjan Principles. We are working together with UNESCO's section on education policy within their Right to Education program, the Right to Education Initiative, and the Global Initiative for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights to suggest that education sector plans should reflect the state's ambitions for enforcing the right to education. By ensuring that education sector plans highlight the progress made and the efforts to come in fulfilling the right to education and related state obligations, chances are that more attention and better implementation will follow. This is our hope, and this is one way the Abidjan Principles are already useful. Today we are celebrating the second anniversary of the Abidjan Principles. To the authors, congratulations again. You still have all my admiration for going through this tough exercise and labor. You must finally have restful nights. To all contributors and organizers, congratulations. You must be starting to reap what you sowed. The principles now have a life of their own, and they are definitely promised to a bright future. Happy anniversary to the Abidjan Principles.
So, Ongera Abidjan Principles, as Margaret Wawira has said to us in Swahili. It's over to you, colleagues. We have a few minutes to reflect, and I would request... Not sure what that was. We have about 10 minutes to reflect on the principles. And if you can maybe raise your hand, and we can then come to you. Please do keep your comments to about a minute so we can get as many participants to share their reflections as possible. So there are a number of, there's a few hands here. So may I go to, apologies, I'm not quite sure whether I'm supposed to be doing this, or Sylvain, is it you? Will we unmute?
Yes, I unmuted them. They're allowed to talk in the order you see them on the screen, and the first one is Enamuru.
Fabulous. Please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Kem Enamul Haq. I'm from Bangladesh. We are glad to be part of this ceremony, and I believe due to COVID pandemic, states are not investing adequate fund, and because of the rapid expansion of ICT for education during the pandemic, we are concerned about if states do not take adequate measures to upgrade the formal education system run by the state, there will be increasing trend taken up by the private actors, and that will affect the right to education. So the state should take some kind of education recovery program and modernization of education, improving the learning management system by introducing more ICT-based education. And in doing so, the state budget is very important. Unless government take early action, we will see huge privatization in education, particularly in developing countries like Bangladesh and other South Asian countries. So I believe this platform can engage with UNESCO and the upcoming UNESCO Education Commission for 2050, so that the upcoming plan can help government of developing countries, particularly adopting the education sector plan, so that it address the needs of the education and help adequate investment in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Enamul, and for the work that you do in Bangladesh with the principles. Please, David Archer, next.
Hi there. Yes, I just wanted to ask whether any panelists have got views on the rather, I think, naive and ill-informed challenge to the Abidjan Principles made by Ben Emerson on behalf of the Global Schools Forum recently, and what would be the best and most effective collective response to what I think were not particularly well-informed comments, which were possibly influenced by those people who had contracted him as a consultant in the Global Schools Forum being a network of private schools. Does this also increase the urgency of providing the full legal justification behind the Abidjan Principles, which I believe is still planned? I'd welcome some reflections on that. But first of all, and most importantly, congratulations to everyone involved. I think it's been a remarkable achievement so far. We just need to keep this going.
Thank you, David, and for your role as well in supporting the principles. I know that Aoife Nolan will answer this question perhaps at the end, but maybe others might want to reflect on it too. We'd maybe at this point like to hear some more views from the floor, if that's okay, and maybe Aoife, you can pick it up at the end, but I'm sure many people on this would be able to respond to that. And I think part of the answer, David, was implicit in your question as well, so thank you for that. Next we call upon, is it Keith Levin?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Keith. Please, over to you.
No, but I put a couple of things in the chat line and some forward references to some recent work. But my one observation is this: in order to make rights realities, you have to resource them. The international community stands on a cusp here because peak aid has probably already happened. It's a dream to believe that the international community will produce more resources for direct investment in other people's education systems. So we look forward to thinking through the consequences of that as we try and rebuild. And we have to think about those consequences in a world where the right to education is guaranteed by governments and the domestic revenue that they can collect in order to make those rights realities, rather than thinking that somehow there is an exogenous solution to this problem. So my challenge, I think, to everybody involved in the right to education, this changes the political economy of delivering the right to education. It's very much something which is about a contract between peoples and those who govern them. And as you will have seen from various work that we've been doing with ActionAid and others, the taxation questions which create public services and public goods are at the core of a new view of how to achieve the right to education. Thanks. And congratulations to everybody.
Thank you, Keith, for that and for your comments on this. Of course, the resource question is never far. So we've heard from a few of our members, but now there's a chance for many of us to really write a birthday card. And this is one of these innovations that people like Sylvain in the Global Initiative have brought up, and we look forward to seeing how this works. We basically have an online tool. It's a birthday card. In the chat, you will see, and I trust that many of you can see that chat, and apologies if you're engaging with this from a phone, it might be a little bit more difficult. But what you have there is a Kudo board in front of you. And this Kudo board, essentially, we are hoping will be written upon with some of your reflections. Really, it's a birthday card, in effect. So please do write on that birthday card. Please do send messages. We'd like to be able to think that we can reflect on these in due course and later on. And I'm sure this will be available on the website as well. So add a post. You've got some instructions there. Don't discard the post before you've written it, but please do add to the post. And let's see if we can put some comments onto that birthday card that really reflect our hopes, perhaps our aspirations, and some of the challenges. We heard about the difficulties that exist with getting further traction with this. We heard about the extent to which some actors in the private sector feel threatened by the emphasis on public education. We've also heard very compellingly from why public education is crucial and why these kinds of ventures are really important in building cohesive societies. So please do put some views onto the cards, and let's see what comments do arise from them. So Teresa has shared the birthday card in the chat. If you can't see that, it's kudoboard.com. That's KUDOBOARD.com. And apologies, I can't translate those into other languages. I'm afraid that particular website is in English. Some further questions coming in. Kennedy Oyer, thank you very much. From Homa Bay, how best can we have synergies to compel international bodies to direct their investments to public education, as opposed to supporting private schools that deny majority of learners from poor backgrounds access to quality education? So please do put your thoughts down. And I have been told that in these kinds of settings, you really have to give people time to be able to write on the card and not just move on swiftly. So we will have perhaps a few minutes of silence just to ensure that people can compose their thoughts and put them down on paper for posterity, we hope. Okay, so I'm not sure we're going to see the outcome of that, are we, Sylvain?
No, I see a few posts have come in. I was just refreshing the screen because it was not appearing as I was not refreshing. But we can move.
It's great to welcome Magdalena Sepulveda Carmona to this call as well. You've been here. We've seen you now for the first time because I guess the screen was full of others. Magdalena, you've played a central role as well, and at a global initiative, you're now furthering this work. And there will be time at the end, I think, to reflect on the views, and you can close the session. But perhaps we move now to hearing from our speakers again. There was one particular question posed with the famous Ben Emerson report, somehow undermining the principles, and I guess thinking those through. Aoife, do you want to start maybe by engaging that, or we could simply go to each of the speakers and maybe give you a minute each to reflect on it. But Aoife, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to finish with a negative end. So rather than launching in, I think, into the person who decided to go on Twitter and say they were proud to associate themselves with a report that they'd done for a private school group, that the Abidjan Principles are an ideological wish list compiled by an unrepresentative group. They're not an accurate statement of international law and shouldn't be relied upon even as a so-called soft law standard. Rather than shall we say, perhaps emphasizing the background of the person who wrote that statement, their experience with regards to human rights, privatization, and education issues, I would instead encourage people to take a look at the phenomenal range of people and expertise involved in the Abidjan Principles. Look at who signed up. These are not international law lightweights. The people who were involved in producing the Abidjan Principles were not unrepresentative. They're from, it's an incredibly global bunch. So what I would say is that we should be celebrating today an achievement which, really has brought on board both international human rights law expertise, but much more importantly, people working on these key issues at a grassroots level internationally. I mean, this is an achievement, and that is the achievement of the Abidjan Principles. So I hope that that is more of a positive answer, as indeed today should be, because we are marking an achievement.
Thank you, Aoife. It certainly is, but I think the panel, the reach and the scope of it from various types of actors in various types of locations, from people who are working at grassroots level to people who have the mandate of furthering these, the traction it has received is incredible, and the progress. And yes, it is a wish list, we hope. We hope we can aspire for a better future. We certainly don't want to condemn the future based on the imagination of the present, because that's not a good outcome for any child anywhere, never mind any adult. So thank you very much for that.
It's a wish list based in law.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. Colleagues, should we maybe reflect that you can see the screen now. Feliz cumpleaños, Principios de Abidjan, happy anniversary. We would like to see the government take full responsibility for right to education in terms of the education sector plan and the national budget. A great initiative, I hope, will prevent exploitation of children and teachers, especially in low-cost private schools. I like the virtual party, whoever's managed to come up with that at such short notice. Well done on that. Happy birthday, Abidjan Principles. May your terrible twos be a great year of moving, shaking, and change-making. Absolutely, in the year of the ox as well. Without the Abidjan Principles, it would be much harder to get agreement at the board of Global Partnership for Education to constrain private sector engagement and effectively prohibit any support to for-profit schools. Congratulations on helping force Bridge International into hiding through a rebrand. Let's not let them get away with it. Thank you for all of these comments, and please do keep them coming. Let's go now back to our panel, if you don't mind, and hear their perhaps final reflections. And colleagues on the panel, you have 1 minute each. Do you want to kick us off, please, Anne?
Yes. So Year of the Ox, I was born in the Year of the Ox, so I'm feeling positive about what it means for us. I think it means, yes, we can engage in academic debate with people who don't agree. I think we're going to have to face that there's disagreement in this sector and we need to engage. So that's something that we can do during this coming year, and the publication of commentary on the Abidjan Principles is going to also be happening during this coming year. So that's exciting. And I think there's going to be a lot of post-COVID, let's hope it'll be post-COVID reflection and thoughts about going forward. And I think we need to keep our eye on those peripheral issues like curriculum development and procurement and so on, in order to make sure that we keep a broad focus in terms of the Abidjan Principles and beyond.
Thank you, Anne. And with your leadership, we are in good hands there in moving this agenda even further forward. Madame Golibari, please, if you could maybe share your views with us. Might just take a minute to locate Special Rapporteur Golibari, but we have. Yes, please.
Yes, I am here.
Merci.
Thank you.
I think we may be experiencing some technical difficulties.
Je pense qu'en ce qui me concerne, je voudrais vraiment encore dire toute l'équipe et tous les acteurs et tous les engagements. Je voudrais juste dire très important, ces principes-là, ils soient vraiment utilisés et ils soient utilisés de la meilleure des façons. Dans un premier temps, au niveau du dialogue politique, nous allons continuer, mais dans un second temps, ce qui est aussi essentiel, c'est ce que Mme Ferrer disait tout à l'heure, les intervenants et intervenantes, on dit qu'il faut à Abidjan même Madame la ministre de l'Éducation s'est engagée à mobiliser l'ensemble des pays de la CEDEAO qui sont des francophones, et je pense que ce serait une bonne opportunité pour que ces pays-là révisitent, bien sûr, les différents accords avec les secteurs privés de leur pays au niveau de l'éducation, pour s'assurer que les principes d'Abidjan de pouvoir effectifs à la fois au niveau législatif, donc en révisant bien sûr les outils et les instruments qu'ils ont, mais
I fear we may have may have lost a special rapporteur. Merci beaucoup. And please
en allant plus loin pour bien sûr les acteurs de cet instrument, il est à la fois opérationnel terrain.
Merci beaucoup. Next, please, Soledad, would you give us your aspirations in a minute?
Thank you, Joshua. Mi mensaje final, pues quisiera reforzar el compromiso de la Relatoría Especial de ESCA, de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos en la protección y promoción del derecho a la educación, reiterar la importancia de los principios de Abidjan como puntos de referencia para nuestra labor y destacar con énfasis la contribución de esos principios, especialmente los desafíos que hoy enfrentamos en nuestra región, que es conocida por ser la más desigual del planeta. Los principios de Abidjan aparecen como puntos cardinales en la tarea por promover la igualdad y la no discriminación en relación con los distintos actores estatales, sociales y empresariales, buscando la afirmación del derecho a la educación para todas las personas y la superación de barreras estructurales, como la brecha digital, que hoy impide que millones de niños, niñas y adolescentes en todo el mundo puedan disfrutar de su derecho a la educación. También estamos viendo con gran preocupación cómo niños y niñas indígenas, campesinos, afrodescendientes o que viven en zonas rurales o en situación de pobreza llevan meses sin poder disfrutar de este derecho, al contrario que quienes tienen la oportunidad, el privilegio de formarse en el sector privado. También quiero dejar registrada la preocupación de mi mandato y de la Comisión por la situación de la libertad académica y la autonomía universitaria en distintos países de América. Estamos trabajando también hacia unos principios en esta materia desde la Comisión, y estos principios de Abidjan van a ser de gran importancia, igual que en relación con la iniciativa sobre principios y directrices sobre política fiscal que estamos apoyando. En la resolución 1/2020 de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos sobre pandemia y derechos humanos en las Américas, hicimos un fuerte llamado a que precisamente en contexto de pandemia, los estados tienen una obligación reforzada de controlar y fiscalizar las actividades empresariales. Esto quedó muy evidenciado también en nuestro informe sobre empresas y derechos humanos, en el que nos referimos a tanto el derecho a la educación como al agua, como a la salud, en los contextos de privatización de estos derechos. Y para finalizar, quiero dejar, como lo he hecho ahora en la tarjeta CUDO, la cita que hacíamos de los principios en el párrafo 228 de nuestro informe. Ya hemos empezado a utilizar en la práctica estos principios, y en ese párrafo decíamos que la red ESCA apoya dichos principios, considerando que los mismos suponen una valiosa fuente especializada para la interpretación de la cuestión en el marco del sistema interamericano. Feliz cumpleaños a los principios de Abidjan, muchos buenos frutos para la realización del derecho a la educación de calidad, sin discriminación y con libertad académica. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Muchísimas gracias, Soledad. And we are about 5 minutes late, colleagues, on this one, but for the transnational adventure that this is, that's pretty remarkable, and for the amount of voices you've heard. But further, there's a plea from Sylvain. He's promised us a surprise at the end, so please do bear with us all the way to the end, and you hopefully will be happy with that surprise, and keep filling up that birthday card. You can keep doing that. There's a great photograph of Delphine. Next, could we hear maybe from Hélène, from your perspective in the department? Any final reflections, please?
Merci beaucoup. Oui, je ne veux pas être trop longue, simplement pour souligner à quel point tous ces témoignages sont passionnants, et c'est vraiment très intéressant de voir comment les principes d'Abidjan ont déjà trouvé des points d'application très concrets au Népal, en Ouganda, dans le cadre du Conseil des droits de l'homme ou de la Cour interaméricaine des droits de l'homme. C'est fascinant et ça montre à quel point ce travail est utile et trouve vraiment des points d'application très précis partout dans le monde. Je voulais peut-être simplement terminer qu'à notre modeste niveau, dans le cadre de notre politique de coopération internationale, c'est aussi un outil que nous allons utiliser comme référence, comme source d'inspiration pour renforcer le positionnement de la France sur son appui à un certain nombre de pays partenaires pour développer des politiques éducatives en tenant compte de ces principes de régulation du secteur privé. Voilà, dans le cadre de l'aide publique au développement, la France a aussi à cœur, bien sûr, non seulement de respecter, mais de soutenir et de renforcer le droit à l'éducation. Et les principes d'Abidjan vont nous y aider. Encore une fois, merci à tous et à toutes.
Thank you very much. And we also hope that the government of France can convince other governments to do likewise. Much appreciated. Justice Mugambe, now from your home, could we hear your final reflection, please?
Yes, thank you. I think as we celebrate 2 years, we need to be reminded, when we set out on the journey of the Abidjan Principles, it was to solve a problem, or at least try and draw attention to solving a problem. The problem was regulating or trying to control the excesses of private actors in education. So it's not like naysayers were not expected. They'll always be there, but that's a sign of the good work we are doing. It's a sign that the Abidjan Principles have hit hard in many different places where we set out to hit hard. So while it's early days and the struggle continues, we should not be dissuaded, we should not be detracted by naysayers. We should keep going because it is a good cause that we are up to. Thank you.
Indeed, we should. Thank you very much for that. Aoife, we put you on the spot to answer a question, but perhaps a reflection on the future, if you would.
Is that?
I think perhaps I'll give the floor to others. We've limited time, and I think my feeling of general positivity and excitement has been captured by other people's inputs at this point.
Very gracious. Thank you. Elaine?
Thanks. I think I'll reflect on the points about funding and financing. Keith and Susan and some others have made that point. And I think one of the things the pandemic has shown is that once you change a narrative about crisis, you change attitudes to tax, you change attitudes to raising public finance. We know already that the tax to GDP ratio, even before the pandemic, was suboptimal. It was 17% in Africa, where OECD recommended 20%. The Abidjan Principles, by centering the right to education, saying this is a kind of public duty, creates the narrative in which more tax can be raised and in which we can, yes, governments are falling on the aid promises, and Keith predicts bad times ahead, but you've got to push back, and this is something to push back on. And so keep on going. It is the year of the ox, and other years, that's a strength, but also other years to look forward to. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. What about you, Ram?
What I want to reflect is maybe in context of the COVID, COVID has brought also the opportunity, and it's a good time to restructure the education system. And so the restructuring the education system do not undermine the right to education, especially the marginalized community. So there, I think Abidjan Principle can be the good reference document. And also because of the COVID, maybe might be in the future that concept of school also may change, because it's a school and classroom. Classroom now is a home of the children, and parents, they are the teachers. So I think the parental education is important to more sensitize them, and maybe the state put the effort to have a parenting education so that they better teach their children when they are at home. So I think these are the important things that we can consider in future. Thanks.
Thank you, Ram. A final reflection, please, Stéphane.
Oui, ben, une chose qui me frappe en écoutant tout le monde aujourd'hui, c'est l'universalité des principes, l'incroyable travail qui a été fait pour que ça puisse servir autant un mouvement de parents ici au Québec qu'une association en Ouganda, que je pense qu'on ne l'a pas mentionné, mais il y a aussi en Argentine, il y a une poursuite qui a été lancée par une association, Associación Civil por la Igualdad de la Justicia, contre la région de Buenos Aires, et ils ont gagné et ils ont utilisé les principes dans leur argumentaire. Donc, je ne sais pas comment vous avez fait, je ne suis pas juriste, mais il y a un travail qui a été fait incroyable pour essayer de penser à la multitude de situations à laquelle ces principes-là pouvaient se référer. Et apparemment, vous avez réussi. Donc, bravo à tous les gens qui ont travaillé là-dessus. Et encore merci de l'organisation de la journée d'aujourd'hui.
Merci beaucoup, Stéphane. Colleagues, my job is done. It's been fantastic. It's been a rich session hearing all these voices from all of these people who have been incredibly committed to these principles. And you need to be too. You need to keep the fight up for a better world, because unless we do that, we won't get it. It's not going to happen by chance. It's not calibrated that way. We have to actually make the effort to do it. The principles are a start to build back better, but they really need to be given life. They need to breathe and they need to fly if every child everywhere across the world is to have a future that they deserve. But I finished with the very, very important task of handing over to Magdalena Sepulveda Carmona, who's the executive director of Global Initiative. Of course, Global Initiative has played this incredible role with Sylvain and Teresa in putting this event together and in really bringing this incredible, rich audience and participants together. And we really are delighted to be able to give the floor to Magdalena to say a few words. And Magdalena, not to mark your cards, but Sylvain has promised us some kind of surprise for the extra 3 or 4 minutes that we've held our participants. Over to you.
Yes, indeed. I would like to thank you all for this great panel. And basically the surprise is that we're going to sing to the Abidjan Principles. We have a cake here, so I don't know where to put in the camera. So we wanted to just, all of you, many of you that are in the panel, played a terrific role in developing this principle. It took many years, several consultations from around the world. This was a very massive and engageful and consultative process. As Ife said, there were not light-weighted behind these principles. But more importantly, I think that this has been clear in the way in which, in record time, these principles have been endorsed by many organizations around the world, and that's it. So happy 2 years old, and I just blowed the candle. So thank you all, and for the next 20 more years of the principles. I'm not going to sing. I could sing the mañanitas, but it's not me.
But are you going to send us all a piece of the cake?
I will send you a virtual piece of the cake to all of you.
So thank you very much, Magdalena. Thank you very much to Joshua for amazing facilitation, as often.
Thank you too. Thank you. Pleasure.
And a huge thanks to all the participants.
Happy birthday again.
Thank you. And we look forward to a year together, continuing working on the ratification.
Happy birthday. Stay safe. Stay sane. Good luck.
Thank you. Happy birthday, everyone.
Muchas gracias. Feliz cumpleaños. Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, everyone.
Thank you.